So tonight we're real lucky to have a great family and a representative talking about their story. And I want to introduce the person that's going to introduce the speakers, Dr. George Pittman.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor for me to have the opportunity to introduce the Speaker of the Hour. This is an impossible task to do. I've been knowing the Speaker for 40 some odd years. So we are sisters and brothers in Christ. Margaret Byrd Jones, the Speaker of the Hour. Margaret Byrd Jones, respected figure in library, science, and community engagement, has led a distinguished life dedicated to education and empowerment. Born in Haines City, Florida, and having resided in Monticello since 1940, Margaret's roots are deeply woven into the fabric of her community. The daughter of John and Lizzie Byrd, she is one of 17 children, including her with a strong sense of family and community from a young age. Margaret's educational journey led her from Florida A&M University, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master of Education. She followed her education with a Bachelor of Science in Library Science from Atlanta University professionally. She served with distinction as the Associate Director of Library of Florida A&M University until her retirement. Margaret continued to continue her alma mater to the permanent friend of Florida A&M University Library, a position she held since 2001. Her personal life is fulfilling her professional one, being a member to 5 children, Everett, Glover, Lisa, Cedric, and Leslie, and a grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 1 great-granddaughter. Her faith played a central role in her life. Baptized in 1949, she has been an active member of Church of Christ, participating in the benevolent work and social activity for favorite hymn as Marching on Zion. And she found spiritual nourishment in passages like James 1, 7, and 4. Margaret's commitment to her community extends beyond her professional and church activity. In 2009, her daughter, Leslie, established the Margaret Byrd Jones Foundation in her honor, aimed at empowering inner cities young girls. The foundation, 501c3 nonprofit, is a treatment to her life dedicated to uplifting others in her leisure time. Margaret enjoyed art and craft and reading work by Maya Angelou, whose words read deeply in her additionally. Margaret is a consultant for the Montague Collection, the largest private African American collection in the United States. As a historian and a curator, she supports her younger brother, Clint Byrd, and her younger son, Cedric Jones, in managing this significant cultural treasure. Margaret Byrd life and work paint a picture of a woman who has spent her years enriching the lives of others through education, faith, and community service. Hear ye Margaret Byrd Jones.
Good afternoon, and thanks to Mr. Pittman for that introduction. I thought he wasn't going to ever stop and thought he was talking about another Margaret Jones. And thanks to Miss Liv John for inviting me to come out and talk about our family. If you know my father, he never stopped talking. So I could talk until in the morning about us and tell you all the other things that I'm not going to talk about here this afternoon. I am Margaret Byrd Jones, and I'm the 4th offspring of John and Lizzie Byrd. welcomed into the world on March the 11th, 1932. A matriarch of 5. I have 2 daughters and 3 sons. And I have 7 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. All of my children and all of my grandchildren have college degrees, and most of them have master's degrees. So we are an education channel for family. And it didn't happen, nobody was driven to college. It's just a thing that happened in our family. Before I get started, I would not only be talking about Jefferson County, but when we moved here in 1940. So I will start with my information talking about where we lived before we came to Jefferson County. When I was a little girl, my father always talked about West Florida. He never said Monticello or Jefferson County. And being a little girl, I thought that West Florida was the name of a little town, like we lived in Haines City, because they always talked about West Florida. And one evening when we came from school, my mother gathered us around. There were 8 of us born in Central Florida. We weren't living in South Florida, we were living in Central Florida. And she called all of us together, and she told us that they had decided that we were going to move back home to West Florida, and we would be living in Monticello. And that was the first time that I had heard of Monticello. I didn't say anything because maybe I'm the 4th child, so maybe one of the other 3 had heard Monticello. Nobody said anything about Monticello, so I didn't say anything about it either, but I had learned a new word that day. And it was during school time, and I was thinking that maybe we have to leave school before school was out, but she told us, no, this will happen after the school term is over for this year. So sure enough, after then, they began to do some things to let us know that we won't be moving because they were packing boxes and all of this. So I told you that first so you can understand that we didn't always live in Jefferson County. But my parents, both parents, were born in Jefferson County. I heard from an older person saying that my father was born in Leon County. But she explained that to me. She said that my father had an older sister that lived in Leon County, and my grandmother then was visiting, and it just so happened that the baby was born there, but they lived in Jefferson County. Now I can continue with what I'm doing, so when you can understand that I'll be talking about 2 places. The saga of the Byrd lineages commenced with an African child, our forebearer, who alongside his mother endured the harrowing journey to the United States on a slave ship. This young voyager, our patriarch in later years, was immortalized through the tales told by our father, with his demise remembered vaguely around 1938 and 39. When my grandfather died, remember this little African boy soon became our grandfather. And as I read, you will find out that when some other things about him. But he is supposed to have passed away either 1938 or 1939. And this story was told to my daddy later because my daddy didn't know when his father had died because they were he was not living here in Jefferson County then. They had moved to Central Florida, and nobody knew how to contact him to let him know because he had moved from the neighborhood where they once lived. And it was not like today where everybody's got an automobile or got a telephone or something and you can find people. So when the family found out that the daddy had passed, the people that knew where my father was let him know. So my father didn't know whether it was one of these years, either 1938 or 1939. I went back sometimes before my older sister died. She asked, we were concerned, and we started writing up a document of all the things because she knew some things that I didn't know, and then I remembered some things that she didn't remember. And we were writing up this business, but the document always stayed at her house. And when I would go to visit, we would sometimes sit down and we would write some other things. But after she passed, I kept looking for that document, and I have not found it to this day, because there are some other things in there that I didn't know that's in that document that I will not be able to tell you about, because she knew them and we had written them down, and we were gonna say that we were gonna write it and give all of the sisters and brothers a copy so that they will know something about our family before that day. So as I got older and had a chance to visit some libraries and then I knew something about the census and census reports and stuff like that. I would go to libraries and go other places to see could I find some information about families in the West, because if you know much about the history of slaves, there were not a lot of slaves out west. Most of the slaves were either in the South or the North, some in the North and some in the East, but out west there were not a lot of slaves. A lot of so I couldn't find a lot of information. The way the information was kept, they would say maybe how many people came from Africa that was living there, maybe sometimes the number in the family, but they wouldn't give names. You would only get names of the owners and that kind of thing. But later on, when you check the census now, later years, you find out that they even named the mothers and the fathers and had all the children's names listed in there. But earlier, this was not done, so we couldn't find any information about that little boy and his mother coming to the United States. And he was a toddler, so young when he came to the United States that if he had an African name, he didn't know what it was. The only thing that he could remember to tell my daddy about the travel is that he remembered a long ride in the boat on the water. And that's how young he was. If he had an African name, he didn't know what it was. And after a little time, and he always told my daddy that they lived, as he got older and knew where he was, they lived near the big house. If you read in the history books, you sometimes come across that term, the big house. The big house was where the owners lived, the people that was in charge. I guess they had foremen and things like you have now, somebody in charge. I think those were the people that lived in the big house. And so my father said that more than likely his mother was a cook or a nurse or something like that. That's the reason he remembered that. So he stayed with his mother and stayed as the only place he could remember living. So that was for a long time, because when he was old enough to do some work, they assigned all of the young men and young women that was that size, that age, to have some sort of task to do on the plantation. So they were responsible for carrying water and mud for the people that were building the adobe villages. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the adobe village, but when I found the books in the libraries, and I carried to my father so he could see what his father was talking about, we found them. It's just like you have apartment complexes and things now. They were small houses, and looked like they were built out of, they weren't wood, so it looked like bricks, but I don't know. But they carried the mud, and that's what the book said, and the water to build these houses. And that's the only job he could remember having when he lived in the West. So as time passed, and the Africans had their freedom, but they didn't understand what that really meant to them. So they worked longer. They didn't just leave then, because the only things the slaves had were the clothes that they had. Other things belonged to the plantation. So they continued to work for the plantation people. And after a while, when it became clear to them and some of the slaves were just leaving, then they knew that they could all leave and nobody was going to bother them. So his mother never mentioned, this little boy never mentioned a father to the man that soon became our grandfather. He never told my daddy about a father. And so undoubtedly, the father never came with them. And during that time, if the father came with them, and they could sell off a slave or give them to someone else. So something like that could have happened, but the father was never with the mother and the son. And after a while, when his mother realized that we can leave now, so he remembered living in a lot of states. He was a teenager now, older than that, but he had grown up to know how to travel. And he stayed with his mother because she didn't have anybody else to be with him. There was no other person. But in that travel, he lived in Oklahoma, Texas, and Tennessee. He gave my daddy a lot of states where he had lived. But after she met a man, and the man's last name was Byrd. So during that time, if a woman married and had children, the whole family would have to change their names. So his name was given when he was on the plantation was Jim Calhoun. And now his name will be changed to Jim Byrd. And that's the beginning of the Byrd name. So now it was time for him he was getting to be a young man, so his mother had protection, so he left his mother and started moving around. Slaves still didn't have anything but what they had. And it sort of carried me back to my childhood when I was a little girl. People used to travel a lot. They walk, and they would have their little briefcases or whatever. They had the little clothes in there. And sometimes they would come by my mother's house, and everybody would be looked out for each other because I guess that's what they would do. And if you didn't look right, my mother would find some of my father's clothes and wouldn't let them in the house, but she'd find a place where they could go hide and change those clothes, and they put them in the trash, and she would fix them some sandwiches or something, and they'd be going on. They'd thank her, and they would move on. And that's the way the slaves, because they were always looking for a place where they could make a little money and maybe find some place to sleep. And farmers that had barns and places like that, they would let them go sleep in the barns in the night and stuff like this. They didn't let them in the house, but they tried to make it as comfortable as possible. And when they come, they would start to walking again until times get better. Just like in my lifetime, I've seen the world change so much until sometimes I just can't believe they ever had slavery. Because when you look at what you see now, we have slavery in some different kind of forms now, but not the slavery that we read about in these books. You say to yourself, sometimes my children tell me, say, Mama, do you think all of that happened? And I say, I think so, because they wrote it down, so I think it happened. But so times change, and people began to make more money. They bought homes, more automobiles, and that kind of thing. So all about the lives changed of people in wherever you lived. And after my grandfather-to-be had traveled along, and he decided that he had not left home right then, but after he had married my grandmother, my father's mother, and had the two boys, Jim and John. And John is our father. But when my father said when he was 14 years old, he lost his mother. So then that just left the daddy and just the two boys. Well, I guess Jim being from a slave upbringing, and he's looking for another woman. You know how that is. So he sort of wandered away, and it just left the boys, that they were there by himself. And my daddy told me he was always so afraid to be at home alone because he's always had someone to be alone. His mother had an older sister that would come and try to help them do some things, just to have a woman figure in the family. So my Uncle Jim decided that he needed to find some sort of work to do so he could take care of his little brother. And he was, called my father was a little brother. So he decided he would go to Central Florida to see if he could get a job somehow, because I can remember some of this when the trucks would come from Central Florida, from these citrus factories, looking for people to pick fruit. And if you were ready, when they would notify you when they were coming to these counties, if you were just get ready. You could get on the truck. They didn't charge you for going, but wherever you were going to land, you had to take care of yourself once you got there. So my uncle decided that he was going to get ready. So the next time the truck come, he was going to go. My uncle, I think my daddy said my uncle was 3 years older than he was. So if my daddy was 14, so I guess he was about 17 or something like that. So he got ready. But if you ever knew my dad and if you had seen the brother, both of them were little. They weighed about 150 pounds wet. And so they were about the same size. So sure enough, my uncle got on one of those trucks and went to Central Florida. And when they got there, they hired him that very Monday morning. He had a job. So sometime between that time and when he had told my father that when he got there, when he got himself together, he was going to come back for him. So when after he got the job and had worked a while and thought could take care of my father, he let my father know that he was going to come back and get him. So my father said he just gave away all the furniture, whatever they had. He said, just pack your clothes because that's all you're going to be able to bring. So everything else is in that house. You just leave it. He saw my mother somewhere. He knew my mother they had been in school a little while together. School terms were not like we see now. The school terms only lasted as long as, I don't know if the county paid them or as they could afford to have a teacher in that neighborhood. Sometimes it would be 2 months, sometimes a month, sometimes some weeks, and that's the way they went to school. So my daddy had spent a little time in school with my mother. And just like a boy will say to a girl, he said, when I get ready to get married, he told her that he was going to be leaving and didn't know if he was going to ever come back to live here in this West Florida. So he said, when I get ready for me a wife, I'm coming back and I'm going to marry you. So we played with that for a little while. We used to joke him about that. So one day I just asked my mother, I said, did he really say that to you, Mama? She said, yeah. She said, but I didn't pay that any attention. But sure enough, when he thought he'd get him a wife, he came back and asked my mama to marry him. And they got married. It was sometime, it was in 1926, I think. I have some statistics. I read them off after a while, but I think it was in 1926. He came back to Jefferson County, and they got married. Now he has carried my mother away. And the first place where they lived was in Sarasota, Florida. And the reason we know that's where he went, because if some of you know Florida, my oldest sister, she was born in Sarasota, Florida. And that's the only one of the 17 that was born there. The rest that was born in Central Florida was born in Polk County. And then we moved to Monticello to finish out that 17 that she had was born here in Jefferson County. I'm going to make you laugh. There's a picture back there with all of us on that picture. And I keep it in my house so I can see. I see it every morning. I see it all day long because it's near the television now. I'm sitting there just doing nothing, looking. I see Mama, and I look over there, and I laugh. I say, Mama, I'm not mad with you, and I'm not jealous either. Because that Mama standing up there with us, she looked just like one of us after 17 children. And so that's a little laugh about Mama and us. But soon when my didn't stay in Sarasota long because the next year in August, Flossie was born. None of us are 2 years older than the other. And some of the last children are not a year older than the other. So my brother was born. My mother always had 2 babies, I say this, because you got a toddler that's just moving, can't do much. And then you got a baby can't do anything for himself. So she always had 2 babies. She had 2 sets of twins, so then she had 3. But it didn't seem to bother them because my daddy was a lover of children. After my mother died, he would visit me often, and he would sit down and talk about the old days. And he told me one day, he said, Margaret, I really wanted 21 children. I didn't even comment to that, I said, but I did. And I made him laugh. I say, you make sure you don't have 21. You might have ones out there. He said, no, I don't have no outside children. I say, so And we just had a little joke about that. I said, well, you didn't get 21. I said, but you got a lot of grandchildren now and great-grandchildren, so you got to be satisfied. And then I would tell them, I said, it's a blessing because none of us were born special children. Everybody came with 10 toes, 10 fingers, could see, learn to talk, to walk, or whatever. So that's a blessing when you're having children. I know people that's got one child and it didn't develop fully and something is wrong. So my mother told me one day, she said, I never thought about that. I guess she said, well, I said, well, you need to think about that because that's happening. You have had 17 children. And when I remember the year, I finished high school in 1949, and my mother had the last baby in 1949. I have some sisters and brothers, and I'm old enough for the mother. That brother is back in the back there. Hold up your hand, Clint. That is the baby of our family. And he was born the year that I went to college. So I would come home sometime from college, and there's a little baby crawling around, and my father didn't want us to live off campus, so sometime there would be 3 of us in college at the same time. Tuition was not as high as it is now, but if it was $50, that was a lot to my daddy when he had all these others to feed. But we made it through school all right, but my daddy was just like one of us. My mother she was sort of like a home person because she always had babies. You can't run around in the streets with 2 babies. So somebody's going to have to be home with the baby. So my mother would always be home more than my daddy. But everything we enjoyed, he enjoyed. Go to football games. And one time he's all packing up one day when I was in college. I said, Daddy, where you going? He said, that A&M is going someplace. He going to finna get on the bus. I said, you going to go with him? Sure enough. And I don't remember if he really went that day. Of course, he was ready. All of the high school football games and things, everything we do, he would take us to dances when we were little. He'd say, I'll be outside to pick you up at 11:30. And we knew that you better get your dance on because 11:30 you better be standing out there and ready to go when Daddy is ready to pick you up. On Friday nights when the football team didn't have a game, they call it a bye week. I don't ask my son why they call it that, I guess. But when they'd have that weekend, he would invite the football boys and things out to the family property. He'd set up the lights and all. And we had a great big yard because my daddy, he really liked to keep a nice yard and all the. When he would come home from work, I have to tell you these things because we talk about it so much. I don't talk as much about it because all of my older sisters and brothers are dead now. And I'm the oldest one that's left. I had another sister, but she was a baby when we moved here. And she doesn't know much about, she just knows that she was born in Haines City. But I was only 8 but I can remember the day we moved to Jefferson County, like it was yesterday. I remember everything. And my oldest sister, she said, Margaret, how you remember all that stuff? I said, it's like another world. I said, this is the reason I know children can learn. Because when you're at a certain age, everything that you see is a learning example, something that you can get something for, and you remember that. So when you see some of these children running around with declare that they can't remember and they can't learn, and that's a tale. They don't want to do any better. And they got people writing up, they got bad schools and bad teachers and nothing to that either. There's some other stuff that's bad about all of that, so we need to check ourselves and see if we do a better job with our children. But anyway, I'm leaving that alone. Well, if you're a parent, you know this. If you have ever had any children, you know that children know how to fool you, they know how to make a lie out of you, and all of that stuff. See, so don't believe that, just make them, train them. That's what the Bible says. That's another thing my daddy would do. He would tell us about some things, and he'd give you scripture for it after a while. Because all our lives that we have been doing the Christian thing. And he wanted us to be, he'd tell us, we want y'all to be good children. I don't want you to be mean and fight. We couldn't fight one another. We couldn't even bring a message in the house about anything we heard in the neighborhood. And sometimes we'd have to get our mother and tell her some things and make her promise us, you better not tell Daddy. Because, see, it's going to be bad business in this house. So we learned to slip little messages into our mother and all because he didn't allow us to talk. He said, we don't tend to other folks' business in this house. So we grew up like that. I only answer my telephone when somebody called me or I get on the phone when I need to call somebody. I don't get on the telephone to call you to go to give you no message about it because I could care less about what's going over at your house. And, you know, every family you can take care of your own, whatever. But some people call you and talk 2 or 3 hours about somebody else's business. So we don't do that. If you ever worked around any of the Byrds, you get the same kind of personality because all of us sort of act alike. Now, we got some that talk more. Because my daddy talked all the time. My mother was a quiet lady. But my daddy talked all the time. And I would ask, I said, Mama, you know you don't talk very much. She said, all I have to do is just wait till y'all started talking. And I just listen to mine. Whatever I wanted to ask, it'd get answered after a while. So she was very quiet. She didn't talk very much. But my daddy talked a lot. And things, he would tell us to remember the main thing. The main thing would be whatever the main thing is, and you remember that. If we would go, he worked all the time. My daddy never stopped working. He worked in the citrus industry. They picked fruit, they canned fruit. They worked where they made the juice. If you go down in Central Florida and South Florida, you see more orange trees. Every city in Polk County and some of those other counties has got all kind of citrus. Everybody in their yard got grapefruit trees or tangerine trees or something. He worked in that stuff all week long. And on Saturdays, well, he always had little extra jobs because people found out that he could really keep a job. He could keep a yard looking really well. And when he would have, everybody would want him to cut the yard. And he's worked with some real rich white people. I'm saying it like that because that's the truth. And we have always lived around wherever my daddy went. He would want us to see some of the things he had seen since he had been in Florida. On Sunday mornings, we'd get up. You didn't ask in my father's house who's going to Sunday school or who's going to morning service because everybody in that house was going. And that was just a thing. We start Saturday evening getting ready to get ourselves out to Sunday morning. My mother didn't go all the time because she got 2 babies. But whenever she could, she would be with us. But my daddy was with us all the time. And then after the Sunday dinner, he would put us in the car. Is my little car back there somewhere? I brought up. Okay. Well, he would put us in that little car and take us for a ride. And I didn't know why he was doing that until I guess I was grown. Just because we would be talking and some of the stuff would come up. So he told us, he said, you know, I would take y'all for a ride on Sunday so your mama could have some rest. Now that the vow that you take, say, to make you one when you marry, my mother and father was just like one. Because if you went to my daddy and something happened or you wanted to do this or be involved with something, and if he said it was all right, but before you left him, he would say, now you must check with your mother. But when you go to your mother, when I ask Mom, she said, did you check with your daddy? And we said, yeah. He said, well, what did he say? And if he said it was okay, it was okay. There wasn't no back talk there. So that's the way we grew up. So after we got older, we just asked one. So that's going to be the same answer you got to the next one. Because they didn't dispute each other. And we grew up living like that. And it became a part of us, even to this day. We were just like that. That you have to remember in life, and they would always tell us, you have to try to make yourself better. They never talked to us about going to college or anything. But coming to Jefferson County, as I got older, was just like a blessing in disguise for my father. With all the 14 children lived to be adults. Now, I just talk about the 14 now because the others had passed away. Just think that you got to feed 14 people. But now you can have a garden, you can have all your vegetables. We had my step-grandfather was alive, and grandmother. They had a smokehouse, and they killed the hogs. And I don't know what they did for that meat, but they could smoke the meat, and it hung up in the smokehouse the whole winter. You go out there, and they cut a ham down. They stayed out there. I don't think you can cure meat like that now. You go out there, you don't know what you might find in your meat. But the meat was good year-round. They could make cracklings. I guess some of you know what cracklings are. And they would have 5 gallons of oil. And that oil would stay good until the next year when they would get rid of the old lard and get the new lard. So since I've been gone, I asked my father, I said, what made that lard stay good like that? And he did tell me there's a portion of the hog that you can fry, cook it, and put it in that lard, and it will not spoil. And I've forgotten what, there's some parts of the stomach. But you cook it, and you just drop it in there, and it will stay fresh a whole year. So now you got all the lard you need, and lard makes good biscuits, you know. This Crisco and that stuff, that's not a good biscuit, but lard makes a good biscuit. So now you got your lard. Where I'm going to have to go back a little bit because when I got to bring you from Haines City to Monticello.
You should talk about how happy everybody was moving.
Yeah, how happy we were.
Okay.
No, we were not unhappy, but when you have school friends, and now you know we had to leave our school friends and our teachers and all of that, and it make you, as a child, I was just only 8 years old, so that sort of hurt a little. But we sort of felt, you know, if our parents were going, then we always felt like we were in a safe place. That's the way I felt, and I believe the others felt that way too. Nothing could happen to us. If I was with my daddy, in the thunder and the lightning, I don't care how it lightning. I didn't even know lightning would kill people till an old lady told me one day we were out under the tree. When we moved to Jefferson County, she said, standing under the trees, if the lightning would hit the tree and hit you too and kill you. So that's when I understood the lightning would kill you, because nobody had ever said that to us. We've been playing around, fooling with the lightning because we were with our parents, and nothing happened to you when you were with your parents. That's the way we spoke. So the morning the people in the neighborhood knew that we were leaving. And where we lived, there were a few black people with good money that lived in Haines City. And we lived next door to the man that the house we lived in belonged to him. And we say he was rich, but he wasn't rich, but he had good money. And they didn't want us to leave. He had one son that had gone to dental school. One became a doctor, but they had a daughter. I've forgotten what the daughter was, but they all went to good schools in that day. So the morning when we got ready to leave, we left early in the morning, and all of the neighbors were out to wave to us on our way out. And lights were on in everybody's house, so it was early in the morning. It was still dark. My daddy, did you find my little car? Well, my daddy had a 1933 or 31 or some Ford. It's I don't know if we call it a Model A or Model T. I don't know which one, but it's one of those.
I think it's closer to Model T.
A Model T.
Closer to that.
Okay. On the back, the only people that are in the enclosure is the front part. If you ride in the back, you're in the open. And that seat was back there. So what my daddy did, he took the back of the seat out, and he built a frame like a little truck. And he extended the back so we could sit there, and we wouldn't be so, see, there was a lot of us, because there were 7 children got to come, mother and father, all these people in that little Ford. So they put some pillows in there, and my daddy bought a canvas. You know what I'm talking about, the cover So he fixed some loops on the side of this, the panels that he had put in the back to make the truck. He said, I'm going to put this there so if we come in a rain, you know, if we run into rainy weather, I can stop and get out and cover you up so you won't get wet. You know how sometimes you see the rain coming and you can't get out fast enough? So sure enough, we were coming on down the road. It was kind of light. I don't know where we were because I didn't know about it. I'd never been to Jefferson County, so I didn't know anything about where we were going, but we were somewhere between here and there. This big rain came, and it just came right down, and that water was so cold. But my daddy spotted a service station. He could see one from where we were there on the highway, and he hurried up and went under the cover of the service station. And I can see the man standing up in there now. When my daddy drove up in there, all these little children, all we had wet. My daddy got up and he covered us up. And the man was standing there and he waved to the man, and the man waved back to him. I guess he said, them poor little children all wet up in the back, but he kept driving. And when nature called, he would have to drive off someplace so you could do whatever you had to do. I don't know how to really say this because we knew nothing about segregation. Not in a way that we knew where white people lived and we knew where black people lived. But in our neighborhood, we had everything we needed, just like they had in their neighborhood. We had good schools, we had drugstores, grocery stores, all of this in the neighborhood where blacks lived. Even had a great big recreation center in Haines City at that time, and that's been long ago. If you go, all of those cities in Florida down in there is a lot of water, and they even had the children could go. There was somebody to operate the recreation center, so they wouldn't want the students to get drowned in there. So you could only go to the water when there's someone to take you to the water, and they would take you out so far in a boat ride. They take about 4 students, little people together. Then they bring that 4 back, and that was that. But you had to get away from that water because you couldn't ever go to the water unless the teacher was there with you or a parent or something like that. And the families, the men in the community on Saturday mornings, they kept the schoolyard nice. It was all pretty and everything. And the schools were nicely painted and running water and all this inside toilets and all that stuff. So we didn't know anything about segregation, and my father never taught this. And I'm thinking after I grew up and would talk with my daddy, there were a lot of things that his daddy had told him, and he told me, he said, I never told you, and you've gotten to be an adult, and I'm not going to tell you today. Just let that be. So some things that his father told him, things to let us do and things not to let us do and all. And that was he and Mama knew about him because that's when that main thing come along. Just to remember the main thing. If I say no, that's what it is. And don't have to have no question about it. Because he told me, he said, I work all the time. I don't have time to be going back over that conversation that we talked about last week. So if he told you last week it was no, it could be 3 or 4 weeks later, it's still no. So you just remember that, and that's the way we lived. And we didn't have any confusion about that either. And we couldn't fight, or sometimes, you know, a brother or sister would make you mad. So what we would do, when we'd be in the room sometime, we'd take a pill and nearly knock one out, you know. But you know you better not cry or nothing, because everybody's going to get punished. So you just keep your mouth shut. And that's the way, if we had to have some squabble, that's the way we got it fixed. And but we all grew up. We went to school. We went everywhere we wanted to go. And because my parents would say, yes, you can go there, you can't go there. And we followed there. But my father, I had a brother that when he first went to college, he was majoring in pharmacy. But I don't know if he was drafted or if he volunteered to go into the Army. But when he had served his duty then and was out and came back, he came back to Florida A&M and started back there. But he wanted to go to California. And I think that more than likely, sometimes in his training, he had lived somewhere in California. And he wanted to go there to live. So he dropped out of school at A&M and went to California. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he got his degrees from Pepperdine School. And after he got there, we had heard this story about that Adobe Village, and where our grandfather said he worked once. So he went to look for it, and sure enough, he found the Adobe Village. And he made provision for my father to get to California so he could see where his father worked when he was a little boy. So my father did had an opportunity to see the Adobe Village in California. But by that time, he had seen what they looked like, because I bought a book, and then every time I'd see another book, when I went to the library, so they had some enlarged books, even large books of Adobe Village. So he could see them all. But he told us that they have toned down some of the Adobe Village, and what's left is like a museum for people to see. Just like if you go and look at, you wonder how they can stay there so long. Don't you ever wonder how the pyramids are still standing? But they're there right on. So the Adobe Village is what was left. They tore the others down. And he got a chance to see that. So when he came back, he was telling us what he had seen out in California and all that. That was my father. But my uncle didn't ever get a chance to see it. He has passed on now, but and my father has passed on, but my uncle didn't ever go to California to see the Adobe Village. Oh, there are so many things that has happened in our lives by coming to Monticello. Okay, I'm backing up and getting started again. When the day we got to Monticello, after we gotten settled, and I don't know if my father had gotten someone. Houses used to have a front porch and a back porch. And on the back porch, someone had a lot of wood all stacked up there, the size that you could use in these wooden stoves. When we went in the kitchen, the stove was all up. We were used to having a refrigerator, but it was an ice box. How many of you know about an ice box? The ice box was ready, had ice in it. My mother even cooked a meal that day. So some food had been bought there somehow, but she cooked and we ate. We were renting from a lady named Desi Mitchell. And Miss Mitchell was really nice to us. She knew that we didn't know anything about living in the country because we'd never been here. My older sister said when she was a little girl, my daddy brought her to Monticello. But my mother hadn't been back to Monticello after she was married. She had never been back here. But my father had been back that one time. More than that one time, we found out, but sometime when we would be going to school, he would be coming to Monticello and going back, but we didn't know where he was going. We just knew he was going and coming home, and that was good enough for us. But she introduced us to a lot of things that day. First, it was after they got things kind of settled. She told my mother, she said, I have to go and feed the pigs. And she lived across the street from where we were going to be living. So she went and got this bucket and had some corn in there and some other stuff in the bucket. And the pen was not too far from where the house was. So we went along with her. We all were holding hands because we were sort of frightened. And if we go to put some feed down and how the hogs would come to the pen to you, run toward it. We thought that they would bother you. So we started to run. So she said, no, don't run, they won't bother you. She said, just watch me. So she went over and she said, then she would call us one by say, she made us touch the hog. And we found out that they wouldn't bother you. So now we know what hogs would do. They'd never seen a hog. I had seen a cow, but the picture of a cow, I had never seen a live cow. But somewhere between here and Haines City, we came to a whole big field of cows. My daddy stopped just about so we could see, pointed at the cows because he knew we didn't know what a cow looked like. Not a live cow. We had seen the picture of a cow in the book. So now I've seen a pig now and a cow. That's in one day. Then she carried us to the well. What is the well? And when we got to the well was close to the house. She said, now, just one at a time. She would hold out her hand. She said, I want you to peep over there just a little bit. Don't get, because you might get excited. I don't want you to fall in the well. So sure enough, we peeped over there, and a lot of water down in there. So she let the bucket down into the well, and she got some water, and she brought it up. She drank a little of it. So we say, yes, she said, anything you're going to do with water, this is your water. So she done introduced us to some water. This is the first day that we got to Monticello. Then it was maybe a little later than this because it was getting dark. And then we realized that where the lights? So I don't know if my father or if she had bought these lamps, but in the house there were a lamp for every room, but she just had them on one table. She showed us how to take the lamp loose and put the oil in the lamps and get it back together. And when she lit the lamp, she carried one of the lamp and put it in every room. And now we had some lights. So now we know about what kind of lights we're going to have. So after then, we were in the living room, and all of us sitting right close together. I don't want to touch you, Mr. Pittman. Now, don't let me push out that chair. So my mother knew that we were still a little, it was different. So she said, we got a battery radio somewhere. There were a lot of boxes that had not been unpacked. So she went into some of these boxes, and finally she found this little radio. So then she brought this, and then we felt different because now we're listening to some music or something. It made a difference. And she said, I don't know if we know about a graphophone, but we had one. All you have to do is to wind it up tight, and then you put your record on there and put it in there, we'll play and have the music. So she said, that graphophone is somewhere in one of these boxes, so but we'll have it out soon. So now, Miss Dexter, that same Miss Dexter, she done showed us how to get the lights, how to go to get well water, how the outside toilets, all of this stuff in one day. So we had a big lesson for that first day. Then when she got ready to leave, she told my mother, she said some of the other ladies wanted to come in to see you because my mother hadn't been back to Jefferson County since she married. But they were all cooking for the 20th of May. So, I never heard about the 20th of May. So after she had gone home, we asked my mother, tell us about the 20th of May. So my mother had been being groomed to be a teacher. And in that day, if you finished 7th grade or something like that, you could start the teaching. Well, see, my mother had a baby every year, and she never had an opportunity to teach. But she was good in mathematics. You couldn't ask for anything any better than my mother with that mathematics. But anyway, she explained to us. And in the end, she compared it to the 4th of July. And then she said, well, black people usually celebrate the 20th of May. I can remember her saying this. She said on the 4th of July, everybody celebrate the 4th of July. See, she said she didn't want to give us some information that's going to upset you, because we were living around white people and all these other kind of people, and everybody seemed to be doing all right. So she said, my daddy told me that if you give a child the wrong information at the wrong time, you could mess up his brains. You have to wait until they're able to absorb something and understand what you're talking about before you go to pushing things off on them. So as we grew up, we learned some things. But by that time, we could take the good and use that and let the bad go where it goes and go on about your business. Because that baby brother's back there, one day he's in my house and I was making up the bed. He said, why do you make up the bed? Because you get back there at night and you're going to tear it up again. So that was kind of like learning, So he understood that, you make it up, but it's going to tear right back up again at night. So I laughed about that. But that's the way my father raised us. And he would tell us all the time, he said, I don't want y'all to be mean children. He said, because if you mean, you raise children, they be mean, and that kind of stuff. And my mother, whatever she said was gospel now, If she tell you something, you understand this. And that would be the main thing from her, because she didn't have time for us to be around there, doing all the other things and got to talk her to death, because she got all these babies to see about. But we had a lot of fun. Nobody ever said to us that you have to go to college. But all the grandchildren, as soon as they finished high school, we had, I guess, two 2 this year. These are my grandchildren, great grandchildren, or something. Just finished, but they are everybody on their way, already going to getting their master's degree already, just graduating, because last year they didn't have graduation, so they wanted to go back and do that graduating thing, but they're already in graduate school. And it's just a thing with us. Nobody push you. They always say you have to do better or learn to upgrade yourself. And then they would explain to you sometimes how things have changed, and they would make a comparison where things used to be when they were children to how it has changed to this time. And you can understand that, but you can't tell a little child that. You teach that little child what the little child needs to know, and as they grow, you teach them these other things. So that's the way we were. Well, after a while, we always had 2 teachers because we could come home. My mother would be cooking, and she would make us read. And if you mispronounce something, she'd correct you. And those reading math problems, she said she'd make us read them, and she said, go ahead and work it out the best you know. And when I'm finished, she'd be cooking or doing something all the time. She said, I'll check your work. Sometimes we would be going to bed. She said, just leave it on the table. And before I go to bed, I'll check and see if you got anything wrong. So when we would get up for breakfast, she would either make a little note or something and tell us if anything's wrong. If she didn't find anything wrong, she would say it was all right. And when we would go to school in this county, we would always have our lesson correct. And we got a lot of resentment when we first started going to school. Teachers and students treated us differently. But we didn't quite understand that either, because we were just going to school and getting our lesson. My daddy said that's all you do, eating and going to school, so you ought to go and make good grades. And wasn't no noise about that, so we made good grades. But after they got accustomed to us, everything became clear and was different. People would be looking for us, and well, we got to be friends. I guess that's the way it is when you don't know a person. You could kind of have those kind of feelings. We didn't ever feel that way about them, but they were strangers to us, and I guess we were strangers to them. But one thing that was really strange to us is where we had to go to school. When we lived in Polk County, we went to schools where they were first to 12th grades, and we were all in the same school. But when we came here, we had an elementary school, a junior high, and then we had to walk to Monticello to the high school. And I went to the elementary school because I was promoted to 4th grade, I think it was. So I went in the country for a little while. And when it was time for the next sister and brothers to maybe go to that junior high, and it was so far away, the only way that they could get to school on time, that same Miss Desi Mitchell showed them a wagon trail where you could go through the woods. And we didn't know anything about any animals. We had never seen a snake or nothing like that. And the lady told us, she said, now, she was trying to explain to us what a snake looked like. She said, and if you see something like that, don't start to playing with it or something like that, because if they bite you, they kill you. So anything crawling was going to kill us now. So but she carried my brother and sister through the woods in that wagon trail so that they could get to the junior high school. The lady that was carrying the teachers from Monticello to those schools in the morning was Mrs. Bach, but I guess some of you might know something about her. But she would go, we lived on the West Lake Road, and that school, Bunker Hill, is on Lake Road. And she would carry them to school. And that's so far, if she had to come by our house, it would be 15 miles or so before she could get around to Bunker Hill. So this lady carried my brother and sister through those woods and showed them a way that they could go through the woods and make that trip shorter in the mornings. So sure enough, before we would get out to walk to Monticello, the other brother was walking to Monticello, then would go through the woods. And I said, you know, when one day we were going to go so far through the woods to see where they were going, and it was so far, and the roads were just where the wagon trail would go by. That was the only place where it wasn't grass. All in the center was just grass. And then I thought about those snakes that the lady told us about. So they never saw a snake or anything, because we just wasn't afraid, just didn't know. But when the real rainy days, Miss Byfoot would put them in the car, and they would sit in the laps of those teachers that were in the car, because she had a car full of teachers, and bring them around that 15-mile trip to our house so they wouldn't have to walk home in that rain. But after a while, when everybody, my mother decided, say, well, since these others are walking, the rest of you just walk too. The ones in the elementary school stayed in it, but the junior high and the high school, we just all walked. We walked 6 miles, that's 12 miles a day. And we walked in the rain. The streets were not paved. It doesn't get cold up here like it used to get cold. Now I got to have a flashback. In Florida, the coldest it's going to get, you put on a sweater, and you're going to take that sweater off before the day is up. That's the kind of cold weather that we knew about. But here we can come to Jefferson County, and it used to get cold around this place. When it would rain, the streets would freeze, and you'd be walking on it was just like ice. Okay. A school bus would pass us every morning. See, we didn't know any better. We just knew that the man didn't stop to pick us up. So after a while, that went on for a time. So one day we asked my mother why the school bus would not pick us up and take us to. In the best of her knowledge, she explained to us in a nice way. She didn't make it sound like we, didn't want us to feel bad about that. So we just kept walking. The bus kept passing us. There was something that was called a no-fence law or something with your animals. But most people had their crops fenced in. So all along the road, there's always a fence. And I know all of you know something about briars, blackberries and stuff like that. Those blackberries used to grow up by these fences. All along the road, there was blackberries. And that same Miss Desi had showed us, she said, you can eat those blackberries. So we had tried that out too and found out you could eat blackberries. So when we would see the bus coming, we would run and get up close to the fence, because if it had rained or something like that, maybe they could get some water splashed on us or something like that. And sometimes that happened. But when we told our mother that sometimes the bus would pass and water would splash on us, she would say, well, if you're not too far from the house, run back so you can change clothes. If not, she made us anybody in here can remember when you could buy flour in a cloth bag, sugar and all this stuff, instead of paper like you see now. She took one of those bags and she put a drawstring in it. My mother could sew really well, so she fixed this bag for us, and she put a towel in there. And she said, you take this along with you, and if anything happens like that, you'll stop and try to get the mud off you and all that. That's called, see, we'd be too far to go back home, but we're going to be late for school. So a few times that happened, and we went, but we made it, and we gone to school. Then after my father came, when we first moved to Monticello, my daddy didn't come right along with us to stay because he didn't have a job in Jefferson County. And with all those children, he had to have a job. So he went back to the same job he had, and he worked there for a while. And we didn't know that the property that we were looking at every day right across the road from where we lived belonged to my daddy, because they never discussed that with us. But the same acreage where our household is today is that my dad had already bought that land. So when he before he found a job in Monticello, he had come back to Jefferson County, and he hired a man name was Mitchell Scott. Mitchell Scott was the husband of Miss Mamie Black Scott, who was a genius teacher in this county until she died. So, and then he hired a man, I don't know the first name, but his last name was Brandon. And those two people, then he carried my mother and the carpenters out in that property and showed them where he wanted the family house to be built. Then I guess my mother had the instruction, we had to clean it up. There were not a lot of large trees, but just full of those small oaks. I don't know what you call them, but they're tough to get up out the ground because we'd be over there trying to help mom and brother and all, and the neighborhood, the men in the neighborhood, they came to help us because we're trying to get enough land cleared so they could build this house. So sure enough, after a while, we got enough of the land, and my father didn't want it close to the road. So if you ever go out to where our family property is, there's more than an acre of land in front of the property because he didn't want it close to the highway. And when that was finished, the carpenters came, and it wasn't long we had a new house. And by that time, my daddy had found work back in this county. So soon he would be moving back here to stay with us and after the house was finished, they painted the house really pretty. My mother liked flowers, and that was another thing. People in the country, when we first came here, they would cut all of the grass off the yard and they would rake the yards. They were nice and clean, but they kept the yards raked. Where we live, people grow the grass and you cut it with the mower. So my daddy he went somewhere and after we cleaned up a lot of the land and bought some grass sprigs back, and he started setting these things out. Then he bought some grass seeds, and it wasn't long before we had a nice lawn, great big yard, all that acreage of land in front of the house was all together. So then my sister said to me one day, she says, Margaret, I think, after we moved here, we sort of changed the culture in our neighborhood. I said, let's not say it like that because we learned as much from them how to live in the country as they learned from us. We didn't change what we knew, but we picked up some things because you have to learn how to live in the country. It's a different story if you lived in the city. So we had to learn how to live in the country. And they taught us what to do. Our house stood out so because by being painted so nicely white like this, there were a lot of nice houses in the country, but they looked sort of worn, where maybe, how the rain can bother with the paint and all, and they were not so bright like our house. So people were coming from all around, coming to see the White House. And my mother was off. They would come when they wanted to go inside and see it. And we had a nice home. And I had never seen any shutters. I don't know if any of you are old enough for shutters. I'm 92, so I saw some shutters. But we had glass windows now and all. We know nothing about the shutters. People began to take those shutters off the house and get them some glass windows too. Soon the electric came around and everybody had lights. And my daddy immediately had us a well drilled. After a while, everybody in the neighborhood had a well drilled. Everything picked up. And it was a big neighborhood then. But as the older people passed away, the younger people sold most of the property to the plantation people. So there are not as many people out where we live now. There used to be. The families that kept their land, now some of the grandchildren are coming back to live there because it's so expensive for a lot of these young people to get a start in life. So they got to find some shelter somewhere. So a lot of them are coming back home, but a lot of them, if they come home, they're going to have to try to buy some property. And my daddy told me once in a life, he said, property doesn't grow. You're looking at all the property you're going to ever see. Say some things, you grow trees and stuff like that. He said, so if you don't hurry up and buy some, it's going to all be bought. And people sell it to you for whatever they want to. So, but they didn't understand that they already had a lot of property that the old people had left them. But when they passed away, a lot of the children sold the property. But some are coming back now, the ones that kept it. And if you ever get an opportunity to just ride out and see, you'll know when you get to our property, because it's different. And it was, I guess by design, it's just different. But it never bothered us about being different and doing things different, because a lot of people have followed us doing some of the same things that we were doing. And we have learned to do a lot of things that they were doing. Maybe a little different, but some of the same things that they were doing. My sister and I, and she's been dead now, I know maybe 4 years or something like that. One day when we were writing up that document that I mentioned, we sat down and we was trying to find out how many people that we knew that had that starting from my mother and father. That means the children, the grandchildren, the husbands and wives and all. And we know of 140 then. But I have some nieces and nephews that I have not seen. But I know there's some others been born since that time. So it's more than that now. But all of that started from my mother and father in this county. And with the children that came from Haines City with some of their children. And everything has been, we've had a good life in Jefferson County. And some of my sisters and brothers, they have told me that they used to say, well, Margaret's so country that she's not going to go in a place. So I'm real country now. I've gotten scared of my shadow. I don't want to go on the water. I'm not going to fly in the planes because the windows falling out, the doors falling off. I can't take it. I don't have enough left in me to deal with all of that stuff. So I'm a real country now. All of my children are grown. But I still have some company. I have a son that lives next door to me, so I live alone in the house. But your children think that they're in charge, so I just let them be in charge. That's that mental thing for them. So I know better, but I just let them be in charge, and we get along all right and all. And I got one daughter who's been away from my house. She graduated from college in, I guess, 97 or 98 or something. Has called me every day since she's been away, and sometimes 3 times a day. She calls me every morning and every evening. And then sometimes when she's at her lunch, I hear from her. And I've heard from her so much until when I don't hear from her, it bothers me, because I'm thinking that maybe she's sick or in jail, I don't know, somewhere. So I don't like to call her on her job, because she's a controller for Enterprise headquarters, and that's a tiresome job, and I don't like to bother people when they're working. So as soon as I think there's lunchtime, I got to hear the voice. And she calls me some mornings early. She said, I just want to see if you're still with the living. So when she picks up the phone, I say, I'm just trying to see if you're still with the living. And I just hang up, because see, she's on the job and I don't want to get no conversation going. But now the other children call. Now my oldest son will call, and he'll talk 3 hours if I don't get him off the phone. I have to find a way to get him off the phone. But they all are good children, and I appreciate that. I have all of us, it's 9 of us living right now, and all of us are in calling distance. If I get on the telephone right now in an hour's time, I could have all 8 of us to be together. I have one brother that still lives in California, and he will come ever so often. He comes to home, but he goes back to California. But I could call my sisters and brothers, and we all be together. We don't fuss at each other. We don't tend each other's business. We, just wish you well all the time. My daddy would treat other people's children just like he would treat us. If he had, see, I'm an old lady, and I remember when black people didn't have bank accounts. There was a lot of things we didn't have, but it didn't bother us because we had what we needed. Maybe we wanted some other things, but we had plenty of food. We always had a place to live, plenty of food, because my mother was a food addict. If you would tell her on your way to bed that you were hungry, you wasn't hungry long, because she was going to fix you something to eat. And that's the way that was at the home. We always had plenty to eat. So you find out in the country, you can always have something to eat. What it is, there's always something. And that's the reason I say that coming to Jefferson County, and my daddy knew this. He didn't express himself like that, but my daddy was a wise man. And I've told him many times, I said, Daddy, you could be the president of the United States. My daddy had a third-grade education. I often, to this day, wonder how it was that he learned to write, to read. Anything he wanted to write, he would write, and he spelled the words correctly. He didn't have to ask us how to spell something. Sometimes I would see something, I say, Daddy, what is this? And he would tell me what it was. And he would laugh. He said, you know, y'all go to school, but y'all not learning that much. But, you know, and you just wonder how that could happen. With a third-grade education, my daddy, you didn't have to tell my daddy anything. When he was laid, he finally became a good bricklayer. He would come to my house sometimes and pretty build something new. And he would figure out how many bricks he was going to need to build that house. And he would show us how he would get it done. I still can't do it. But he said sometimes when I get through building a house, I'll have maybe 25 bricks left. Something like that, you know, just a few bricks. Say sometimes you run a little short, but you always try to, whatever your figures are, come up with a few more, so you know you're going to have enough, because they change the patterns of the bricks so often till you may not can find the pattern of the bricks that you were building a house. And that's the way it went on. My mother had finished the 7th grade, and she was one more mathematician. She would work out problems for us and all, and we just enjoyed that. We always had 2 teachers, one at school and one at home. So we wasn't shortage of a teacher. And then after a while, I had a lot of teachers at home because I'm old enough for some of my sisters and brothers. I'm old enough for their mother. So we were teaching them too. Okay, I got to tell you about this one schoolhouse. I'm going to soon shut up. But when we had to go to when I went to elementary school in the country, I had never seen a one-room school with one teacher with maybe 4 grades in there. So I was wondering, say, how this going to happen? What she would do, she would teach the upper grades first, maybe like the 4th, 5th, and 6th, or 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever the higher grades that she had. And then those students would help her teach the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades. And it worked. Had good students. I can't remember but one person in my life in elementary school in this county that would need some special help. But that young man left this county, married a teacher in Tampa, and had a cleanup service for the city of Tampa. Married a school teacher. Had a good life, but that was the person that I knew as we look at special students where they need some special help. And if you notice in these schools, when they started team teaching, they soon had to cut that out because there were some flaws in that team teaching. And that didn't last very long in the state of Florida. I don't know what happened in other states. But whatever you can do for special students, that person could have used some of that help. I don't know whether he finished, I don't know what grade he went to because we left him in the elementary grade, but that was the only somebody. But now you can go to these schools and they got a whole room full of these folks. They declare they need some special help. I don't know who needs the special help worst, but they say that they need some special help. There are a few things that I have not said to you that I got some statistics that I said I was going to mention. Because I didn't know if you needed this. My mother and father was born the same year. My mother was born in, both of us were born in 1906. My mother was born in August, and my father was born in April of that year. The first child and the last child of the 17 children were born the same day, the same month, and the same day of the week. So it was time out. My mother died in 1974, and my daddy passed away in 1999, I think it was. And there are, as we grew up, there were some things that my daddy talked with us about. But now we're able to process that stuff. And it doesn't mean to us what I know it means to some other people, because they always, sometimes when people are talking to me, I hear something else. I listen, but I hear something else. I don't respond because we don't think alike. And I don't want to dispute what you have said, but I think differently from the way you think. And I don't know if the results would be the same, but that's the way we think, because we were brought up to think like that. My father would correct you. If you had on high top tennis, and you didn't have them string up, he would tell you the reason they put those holes in there in the strings, so you're supposed to string them up. You know, just all kinds of little things. If you had on a shirt that need to go in your pant, you put it in your pant. They make shirts that can hang out, so that's what you let hang out. Just all kinds of little things, and it wasn't any harsh things, because my daddy didn't even like to spank people. And he didn't like that switch business, because he said, you have to, switches will put whips on you and all that. You don't have to do that to punish a child. Say, because children always want to do something. You can just punish them, say no. And that's a big punishment for a lot of children, because, you want to do things sometime, and it's really bothering you. You really want to do it. And if you tell them, no, you can't do that. And you already, that's a punishment. And then you remind them, say, last week when just tell them. And they won't do that anymore. But we have to be very careful with raising children and wanting them to go to school. And a lot of people here, white and black, ask me, say, Margaret, how did y'all learn to go to school? We didn't learn to go to school. We just kept, my father say, make yourself better. And my mother used to say, when you know to do better, you do better. When I went to graduate school in Atlanta, I was in one of the administrative offices. I walked into this office, and there was a big sign over the door said, motto. And that's when I learned what the motto for Atlanta University said. It says, find a way or make one. And I immediately thought about my daddy, and that's just what he thought. Either if you can't find a way, you make a way. So we would talk to make a way. Always try to make your life better than it used to be. And that's not better than another person, that's just better for you. And then you can maybe help some other person. He wanted us to be loving and kind and understanding of other people. Always think before you speak. Just because you get mad, just don't say anything to people. Sometimes you have to go back and tell people you're sorry. And that's a little hard thing to do sometimes. So don't do it to start with, and then you won't have to do that. People would come to my father in the night to borrow $20. My daddy had all the children. And his bank account was in his bill folder, because he didn't have no bank account. He would get his bill folder, If he had $20 in there, he would give them, these would sometimes send the children. If he didn't have $20, whatever he had in his bill folder, he said, take this to your mother and tell her this is all I got, and she can have that. So sometimes we would say, but Daddy, why did you give other people your money? You got all these children. He said, we can make some more money and say money does not belong to you. It circulates. All of this money belongs to the government. And he said, you have to remember, he was a Christian man. And I say this, and I really mean it. I mean it for myself. I'm not meaning this for anybody else. That if my daddy doesn't go to heaven, ain't nobody going. All us gonna be lost. Because he practiced that thing. He would give us a scripture for some of this stuff that we be talking about. He said, you sing that song where the soul never dies. He said, you can have $1 million in the bank. You can have the best house on the block. All the money that you can count. When you die, it dies. It dies to you. You don't carry that stuff with you. Only the good things follow man to death with the soul. And you're always trying to fix the soul so it can be saved. And that's where he raised us. He didn't talk about what you got and what you a lot of people think that if you got $1 million, you just got $1 million. It helps the banks out because they can lend your money out and make money for the bank. And give John some money when he needs to get him a loan, a car or something. I have a few things and I'm gonna let you go, that I remembered coming to Monticello. I have the 20th of May, well water, lamp lights, horse and wagons, all of these different kind of crops that you grow, all the blackberries and all the other kind of berries. We used to go in the woods and get huckleberries. We had the rolling stove, raising chickens. We have so many chickens and eggs, we had to give them away. A lady gave my mama some ducks. Don't let anybody give any ducks, because the ducks, they multiply so fast, you had to get rid of the ducks. So we finally had ducks. Watching people kill hogs, going to the cane grinding and seeing this kind of stuff. So we learned a lot coming to Jefferson County, things that we will never have learned by living in the city, because none of that stuff was in the city. You go to work, you have a job in the city, you go to that job, you come home, and you do the other things that they do in the city. But you don't see any of this stuff that goes on in the country. And some people, when I first went to college, they would ask me where. I said, I'm from Monticello, but we live in the country. And a lot of kids would be ashamed to say that they live in the country, but I was not ashamed to say we live in the country. See, because we had enough to eat. My father, on some Saturday evenings, my mother would cook chicken and would send us a big box of stuff, and they would call us on the inner side. They'd say, Byrd, you have a package at the office. And when I get down to the office, all the other students down there, because they'd be waiting for my daddy, because they know he was going to be bringing some other kind of food to the campus, and we would have some other things to eat. My daddy met everybody, anybody that was dealing with us. He met the president of the university. And when the president would see us, he said, well, how's Mr. Byrd? And he said, well, he would send a little message to our daddy by us. This is the president of the university. Because he knew everybody. Nobody was a stranger. Mr. Pittman knew my daddy. He knew my mother too. But that's the kind of daddy we had. And I've got some sisters and brothers that are the same way. They just know everybody, and we speak to everybody, and we just go on about our business. And the grandchildren are a little different because they're living in a different time. Because I remember when there wasn't no television, wasn't a lot of things that I know about. But now, these children see so much. You wear wristwatches like it's everything. Get your blood pressure and all this, but I heard over the television the other night, be careful with those things, because a lot of us are lies. And you may be dying, and you think that's your blood pressure, so you better be careful with all of that kind of stuff too. So, but they're living in another world, some different times, and they're a little different from They're a little different from us, but you can still see some of the traits of the original Byrds in these youngsters. When Miss Littlejohn sent me, I don't know if I have answered all the questions that you needed to know. There are some things back there on that table. I just want you to look. There's a picture back there with all of my mother and father and all of the 14 of the children on that picture. There are some other things. I have a copy of my foundation. Some other things. My son is here. This son writes. There's some books back there that he's written that you can just take a look at, and you may would like to order one. My little car is somewhere in here. So that little car, that little Ford that my daddy had, we came to Jefferson County in that day, it's back there. And some other things that if you would like to see.
Well, that was wonderful, and I'm glad we had such a big audience. Margaret, that really was wonderful.
Well, thank you.
And thank you so much.